everybody. BPIP Scholars 1 through 4. Isn't this amazing? It's been 4 cohorts now. So it's great to have all of you kind of come together and meet each other. This does feel like community to me. And of course, HBW sees it as part of our extended family. That tradition is a long held one for HBW. So it's the scholars, it's advisors here who are here join us. It's people who've been working actively with us, our partners. So thank you all for coming in so early this morning. I see a few more people dropping in, but again, I just want to thank everybody. This is day 2 of our mini conference. We started doing that during COVID. And so this has been a key aspect of the work that we do, giving a chance for people to come together and to meet each other, but also to share. And of course, today is including a workshop session this afternoon that we want to get much more feedback on the projects that you're doing. So filling up well here. Thank you. I see some more faces joining us. Erin, are you able to tell when maybe we've reached the point of, have you reached that point almost? So, again, everybody knows Maryemma Graham. I'm excited about this work that we're doing. And I'm going to ask Marilyn Thomas Houston, who is our partner on the digital publishing side of BPIP, if she will say a few words of welcome as well.
Good morning. It's good to see all of you here. As Maryemma said, I am with the Afro PWW project, co-PI and project director for that program. And we are really excited about partnering with the BBIP project as well. It's our first time doing this kind of partnership. We've given presentations and that kinds of things with BBIP before, but this is the first time we've partnered where we are hoping to get some publications out of the participants. So I'm excited, and I'm looking forward to listening to your projects and your ideas that you have.
So thank you, Marilyn. Some of you know Marilyn already because you are involved in the course. Even though it's a self-guided course, you've been meeting her regularly and meeting your advisors. Just a couple of things that I want to remind people about. Erin, should you do your reminders first before I say a few more things?
No, you can go for it, and then I'll just.
Well, okay. This morning, of course, are the presentations. Each of you has 15 minutes. And so here's how we're going to do that. We're going to run them nonstop. If you take less than 15 minutes to do your presentation, you can take questions. But if you take 15 minutes for the presentations, the questions you'll have to hold, and we'll do them in the open session at the end. So it really depends on how you've planned your presentation. If we ask you to do 8 minutes, 8 to 10 minutes, that gives time for presentation. But we know setting up, getting your screen on, all of that sometimes takes a few more minutes. But we want to keep strictly with the 15-minute limit for each of the presentations. So some questions may come, but definitely write them down, and we'll ask for them later. I also want to thank Erin, Sarah, and Victoria, who's going to be tweeting while we're in the session, who is our social media coordinator at HBW, and Malia for their very, very hard work. You all know that we could not keep all this together without them. And so Erin is with us today. She's going to be our tech guru. So you might not see her face throughout because she'll be managing and monitoring. But anyway, I just want to make sure I always acknowledge the great work that these folks do, who are strictly professional, committed to this work just as you are. So thank you all for being here. So Erin, a few reminders, I guess.
Yes. So the conference formally kicked off yesterday, so this announcement will be reiterated for some of you who are here. But as far as our expectations for you all as participants, do what you can as much as possible to keep your camera on as you engage with our speakers and their lovely presentations. If any of our presenters are using video while they're sharing their screen, that would be, excuse me, the time to actually shut your camera off. It saves bandwidth on your internet. Also encourage you to shut off apps like Outlook or your other calendar or mail apps because they take a lot of internet space. This will kind of keep you in time with the video, reduce lag, things like that. I will be monitoring the chat. So as speakers are going, feel free to put your questions in. And then as Maryemma mentioned, if there's time within that speaker and presenters 15 minutes, I will offer the questions up for you, or you're more than welcome to wait during the general Q&A to ask those questions. Email me if you get kicked out and you can't get back in. Every speaker I will spotlight. So we'll be able to see the screen and see the speaker as they go.
Okay, and we are actually pretty much on time. So thank you, Erin. First up is Clarissa West White. And what I'll ask each of you to do, because I cannot remember, just tell us which cohort you're in when you start, because some of you are alums and alums, twice removed, but it just helps to know which cohort you're in. So Clarissa, you have the spotlight for the first presentation today, and looking forward to listening to you. Take it away.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm tripping over here because I couldn't see myself, and I realized I had hidden myself from another presentation because I hate seeing myself on the screen. But I'm in cohort 2. And so part of that is in my presentation. So I'll go ahead and share. And I decided to post my presentation on the output, one of the outcomes of the current grant that Dr. Saritha Williams and I are currently in the winding down phase. But we decided, and I'm going to kind of move through how we got to Curated Vocabularies and Maryemma Bethune from BBIP to Scwared. And I did it on a timeline because I like to play with things and I like to, do the things I ask students to do. So I remember having some students from Argentina who came and spent a week this summer at Bethune-Cookman, go through all the Northwestern tools for some projects. And I got to see some of their frustrations and some of their growth. And so I thought it was only fair that I do so as well. So we got started in this. I got started in this. I kind of inherited. I will just say my steps are always ordered divinely. I never take credit for anything intentionally because I just kind of stumble into things. And so I joined the second cohort and I was going through all the different possibilities for a topic. And I just had so many, I couldn't focus. And it then came about that in one of the presentations that Saritha did, I was like, oh, that sounds interesting. And I was also working with the Zora Neale Hurston Festival, who created their plan, and they picked up Afrofuturism for their 5-year cycle. So I was working on the side with that. And so when she mentioned what she and Conrad Pegus and Rochelle Spencer were up to, they were members in the first cohort. They wanted to compile a list of Afrofuturistic search terms to locate examples of Afrofuturism in BBIP's database. And so Saritha and I kind of took that and moved forward. So I came into the second cohort and seeking to locate a topic. We also connected through her journal, Third Stone's Black Fantastic Bibliography Project. So she has a journal and it's there. And one of the things that I am charged with is the bibliography or bibliographic portion of the journal. So encouraging people as they read Afrofuturistic texts, sounds, music, art, to write a blurb, to write a scholarly bibliographic annotated entry. And then we publish them. And so we started with that as well. And so just to kind of put everything together, it worked just kind of out of what life has. We were told about the Hattie Trust and the Scwared project, and that they were looking to fund somewhat robust, unique computational projects. And so we wanted to see if we could come up with a curated vocabulary that would identify Afrofuturistic text across all databases. And so the one at hand was Hattie Trust. And so we applied. We received the award. It was for roughly, just kind of round up to about 30 grand. And this is where we realized some of the issues with accepting with new grants that are designed to help, but when these grants come into systems that don't operate in that same creative space, how much difficulty it can be in just getting the student workers paid, getting stipends, paid travel, splitting the grant was an issue because, Dr. Williams is at Augusta, I'm in Florida at Bethune-Cookman. And so there were just some capacity issues around the actual grant, but we were able to move forward. How you just kind of put all that on the back and you just keep doing what you said you were going to do in the grant. And so what we said we were going to do is try to identify, again, this vocabulary, which we had created through BBIP of about close to 60 words or so. And interestingly enough, none of those words really showed any significance when they were analyzed through the different computational notebooks that were used for the project. One of the things that the other part of what we said we were going to do is also prove that Mary McLeod Bethune was indeed a Black fantastic / Afrofuturist. And of course, when I talk to people who are leaders in this, who this is what they do for a living, they go like, surely she is. Yes, yes, yes. But, and I've read a recent article that came across, and the young lady, I can't remember her name off the top, but she put forth the same argument. Yes, of course she's African, but creating that and trying to do that through a research lens is not as simple as just saying, yeah, like in my heart, I know she is, because, I work with so many of her works every day. I'm the archivist, recently appointed university archivist. So her papers and the foundation, her articles, her physical house and items are on campus. And so I can see through that, and I can see her writings that clearly she was an Afrofuturistic icon, and that she moved in all these spaces that we still cannot fathom today. Because I get researchers who come by, and when we start doing, she was the first of this, and she was the first to do this, and she was the first to do that. And they're just like, in what year? And so we know she is, but again, trying to link it to the vocabulary, to her writings, because she didn't write a lot of, or any creative writing. She didn't write any, she didn't write any fiction. All her writings were nonfiction. And so we have her columns in the Courier, for example, in the Chicago Defender. We have her writings that she wrote to people. We have instances where she wrote what we would probably call eulogies, but that's kind of not, I don't think, the intent at the time. But you could see her writing ability and creativity, but not in the same way of Zora Neale Hurston. And of course, I mentioned Zora Neale Hurston because she taught at Bethune-Cookman and briefly, and there are letters between the two of them. And so some of that has picked up a lot of recent interest. And so a colleague and I are looking into that as well. But because she's not in that category to easily kind of look at her writing through that same lens, we are finding we have to pull in some other things to prove what we know to be true. So we created this. So one of the things we had to do was report out, of course. And so this Google site is one of our reports. And here we have some letters. We have a video about the archives. We've linked, shared some photos, some of her letters, some of her awards, did a little blurb. And of course, we have thousands upon thousands of letters, so we can't put them all here, but we pulled some just to kind of show some of the people she communicated with, and also where, you know, you can find some photos and some other information and a video tour of the home, because it is the most popular site visited when people come to Daytona Beach. And we get more hits for it than many other attractions in the area. So we reported at 2 other conferences on our findings such thus far. So one was the Florida Library Association, which was fascinating because we had librarians and different researchers within librarianship look at counter our findings. And I had people from, you know, a range of backgrounds and disciplines kind of give some input. And then the second place we reported or presented was the Digital Humanities Conference 2022 that was virtual. And this is a screenshot from our presentation. And we put that here as well. And I'll share the link to the to this site so that you can kind of peruse at your own leisure. And I'm trying to get my time because I should. Okay. And so we also this is a slideshow that you can look through, because we talk about and then this is the final slide. So it walks you through, you know, our findings, keywords, the work set, how that looked. And interestingly enough, the word that stood out across the BBIP collection and Mary McLeod Bethune was time. And so we're moving forward and writing our white paper now to explore that as a, you know, for someone to pick up and move forward, hopefully, as we continue to do so as well.
Looks like we have about 2 minutes for questions.
Okay. We do. If you have a question, I saw, Mbalia, you had a comment, I think, to share with Clarissa, if you want to.
Yeah, the project sounds really interesting, and that challenge of figuring out how, you know, to prove that, you know, a writer actually has interest in another area just made me think about the work of forensic linguists and how, you know, part of their work is determining authorship, but there are also ways to kind of find out what themes continue to circulate in the work that kind of relate to a broader topic. And so the challenge you have is interesting. And it just really kind of made me think of the work that forensic linguists are doing in related areas. So I hope you keep persisting.
Yeah, we promised ourselves we would. And I try, you know, we try. We hope we can be truthful to ourselves. I tend to talk about Mary in a very present sense, because I really do feel her every day. And so I don't think I could not see this through. Mm-hmm.
Good luck.
Thank you.
I think, of course, this is one of the advantages of what we're doing today, is to have the kind of intersection of work that people are doing and see how it might benefit somebody in another way. So, but thank you very much, Clarissa. Now, Seth, I think you're on next.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. Thanks. Also, I sent an email out this morning, sort of semi-panicked about I couldn't find the link to the meeting. So my apologies if you got that email. I just wanted to make sure I was here. Good morning. It's really nice to see everybody. I'm in this year's cohort, so my project is not as far along as the great project that we just witnessed. But and so what I've done today, I don't have a slideshow or anything like that, but I have written a short paper to talk about what I've done thus far this year. And the title of my paper is called Minor Disruptions on Black Literature and the American Southwest. And the way that I'm thinking about my time here is this first year, I'm really trying to use the corpus and gather the data on the ways in which the American Southwest has shown up in these texts. While I'm doing that, I'm also trying to come up with an organic definition of the region, one that is articulated through the research, through the corpus. I think in a future advanced course here with BBIP, that would be the time to try to put together a digital humanities project, and I'm thinking a third stage after that could very well be, potentially, optimistically, a monograph. But for now, though, I'm focused on the gathering of data and articulating a theoretically informed definition of the Southwest. In the presentation that I gave back in July, I offered a brief historical overview of how the Southwest has been theorized, but I really wanted my definition of the region for this project to be one that grew organically with the research. So I started with New Mexico, because on any definition of the Southwest, New Mexico is going to be part of that. And I looked at more than 50 different terms in the corpus. Most of these involved cities and towns, but it also included the names of major rivers, mountains, and indigenous tribes. I cataloged every time one of these words appeared in a text, and if New Mexico was a major setting in the novel, I then read the entire book. I'm currently in the process of doing the same thing with Arizona, again, because Arizona would be considered part of any Southwest that I'd be working with. However, it's taking me a little bit longer because, having discussed this project with Kaylin Dwyer, digital media specialist at the University of Kansas, and Hoyt Long, an associate professor at the University of Chicago and one of the principal investigators at the Textual Optics Lab, I'm now in the process of also, while I continue to gather data on Arizona, I'm also in the process of revising that data so that it aligns with best practices, so that when this project does move to the digital humanities stage, I can also publish that data alongside it. So that, I didn't exactly know what I was doing when I started off, and so I need to go back and fix some of that data. Okay, so that's where the data collection stands as of this morning. During my presentation here, I'd like to now sketch out my definition of the Southwest as it relates to African American literature. What many of us now call the Southwest might be geographically filled with cacti, mesas, and deserts. The space also contains a number of cultural contradictions, perhaps none more telling than its geographical designations. In the Navajo language, Dineta means among the people, which might be translated as homeland. And it refers to a large area in northeast Arizona, northwest New Mexico, southwest Colorado, and southeastern Utah. Similarly, Lee J. Kuwanwisiwa explains that the Hopi word for homeland, Hopi Dutswa, which encompasses everywhere the Hopi people and their ancestors traveled, lived, and were buried during the long migration from the place of origin to the center of the earth. As a cultural landscape, Hopi Dutswa is defined by landforms associated with deities and historical events, rivers, springs, shrines, and what the Hopi people call Itakuku, or our footprints. Relatedly, in the Apache language, Ni means both land and mind, thereby indicating, as John Welch and Ramon Riley have observed, the inseparability of land and thought, of geography and memory, and of place and wisdom. In the two European languages that now dominate the region, the sense of cultural memory imbibed in the Navajo, Hopi, and Apache terms have been elided. And so we're now left with two opposing directional terms, the Southwest and El Norte. Other cultural contradictions abound. For many artists who arrived in Taos during the 1910s and 1920s, the Southwest was a utopia. For the Latin American migrants who lost their lives attempting to cross the US-Mexico border, it's been a dystopia. For the Mormons who broke away from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints to practice plural marriage in what is today called Colorado City, the remoteness allowed them to construct a fundamentalist enclave. For the hippies that now populate East Jesus, a desert cooperative for artists close to California's Salton Sea, the desert remoteness is seen as similarly advantageous. Sedona, Arizona, has become a center in New Age thought because the area's vortices are thought to be healing. And yet it's less than a day's drive away from Alamogordo, home to the White Sands Missile Range in New Mexico, where the federal government first detonated the nuclear weapon in 1945, the radiation of which likely caused the unusually high rates of infant mortality in those communities downwind from the explosion. A place of memory, a place of forgetfulness, a pre-lapsarian utopia, a hellscape of dehydration and death, an isolation that serves both conservatives and antinomians alike. A landscape that inspires meditative tranquility as well as destruction, the likes of which have never before been seen in history. This is the Southwest. Methodologically, the region's literature was first associated with the Old West, an approach that foregrounded Anglo men who became heroes by encountering otherness. There was an underlying formula to these narratives. The hero relied on his inventiveness, courage, individualism, etc., whereas otherness was sometimes represented by class, gender, and religion, but most often it was marked through racial and geographical differences. Race and geography became linked through the concept of the frontier, a mode of cultural demarcation that concealed the violence of westward American imperialism by fetishizing acts of alleged Anglo heroism. The Anglo hero was changed through his experiences, but the transformation of those he met was either ignored or dealt with rather superficially. Since then, new Western critics, border theorists, scholars of Native American literature, and scholars of Native American literature have moved away from this outdated model of Southwestern regionalism. Recently, critical regionalist scholars have begun to explore how the area might contain geographical, linguistic, and economic interconnections with other cultural spaces. On this model, a region is a connection that highlights the linkages between cultural landscapes. It's a term that suggests being open to that which is beyond the local. Critical regionality thus remaps previous regional boundaries to discover translocal linkages. It's precisely this kind of remapping that foregrounds African American literature of the Southwest. So in Kafka, Towards a Minor Literature and also 1,000 Plateaus, Deleuze and Guattari theorized the concept of minor literature as a way to work through what it might mean to write in a marginalized voice from the cultural periphery. More recently, Neil Campbell has extended their arguments about the deterritorialization of language towards a regionalist framework. And so he reconfigures the American West away from its epic meta-narratives of manifest destiny and conquest and unilateralism, and instead interprets the region as a space that's dynamic and relational in its engagement with both local and global developments. Like these thinkers, I also believe in the radical possibilities of the minor as a way of conceptually disrupting that which is major. And in the time I have left, I'd like to explore a preliminary helixing together of two related disruptions. The first is how might our understanding of African American literature be deterritorialized by a minor region like the American Southwest? And the second related disruption is how might our understanding of the American Southwest be dislocated by minor African American writers. The character Gabriel in David Anthony Durham's Gabriel story, the novels that I'm about to talk about all come from the corpus. Okay, so the character Gabriel in David Anthony Durham's Gabriel story is only able to find a sense of home and belonging after traveling to the multiracial Southwest, wherein he experiences both extreme acts of violence and friendship that complicate the Black-white binary of his past. The past similarly haunts Turtle, the heroine in Clarence Major's Painted Turtle, as she travels throughout northern New Mexico to carve out an identity as a songwriter that reflects both her individual and tribal selves. But it is in Susan Laurie Parks's Getting Mother's Body where the Southwest comes to haunt African American literature most clearly. The mother of the main character has been buried in Arizona, and much of the novel is about attempting to recover her body. In other words, the characters must travel to a place without a strong African American tradition in order to uncover, restore, and refresh their own place in the world. In these three texts, then, we see a strand of African American literature wherein the Southwest takes on a kind of spectral otherness that haunts each of these narratives. As for the second disruption involving how the American Southwest might be dislocated by African American writers, Terry McMillan's Waiting to Exhale and Getting to Happy serves as an important model. Rather than emphasizing the unique cultural and geographical uniqueness of the Southwest, McMillan instead depicts four women who try to create networks of feminist kinship against the backdrop of Phoenix, a city that is represented as an otherwise boring example of urban sprawl that is not so fundamentally different from a place like Denver. To borrow a phrase from James Clifford, Phoenix is routed, not rooted. And thus the struggle to construct a community there is one that takes place in every city in the country. McMillan's novels invite a critical regionalist framework that links Phoenix together with other urban areas, thereby disrupting the sense that the literature of the Southwest is uniquely local. Earlier, I asked two related questions. How might our understanding of African American literature be deterritorialized by a minor region like the American Southwest? And how might our understanding of the American Southwest be dislocated by minor African American writers? It's too early in the research process to answer these questions with any degree of depth. But if the spectrality of Susan Laurie Parks and the critical regionalism of Terry McMillan is any indication, the dialogue between African American literature and the Southwest is long overdue. And I think I made it with about a minute to go.
Indeed, you did. In fact, you have, 1 minute. So sorry. Okay. Thank you for staying on time. If you have any questions, please note them down so that we can get to them at the end. Seth, exciting project indeed. All right. Thank you. Let's move right along. Eliseo.
Yes, I'm here. So let me share my screen real quick. All right. Can everybody see this, my PowerPoint fine? Awesome. Yes, so my name is Eliseo Jacob. I'm a professor at Howard University in the Department of World Languages and Cultures. So I originally started in BBIP back in 2019. I was part of the first cohort, along with Marina Del Sol, that's also here as well too. We actually ended up publishing an article that just came out at the end of 2021 based on our experiences with that first cohort with the BBIP digital archive. So that's been a great experience. And now I came back to be part of the fourth cohort for the digital publishing that's in collaboration with Afro PWW. So my project today is called Afro Artivismo in Brazil. This kind of project developed especially based on my Fulbright research this summer in São Paulo. I was there doing work with kind of ethnographic work with different writing and artistic communities that are primarily Afro-descendant populations in the urban periphery, the outskirts of the city. And so I want to talk a little bit about how this project developed. And this project that I was doing in Brazil, a lot of these artists and writers actually do a lot of work in the schools and community programs in their own communities. And I would actually accompany some of them to these the work they're doing to kind of introduce literature and literacy in those schools. And then based on that, one of the teachers at one of the events, he invited me to kind of talk about, Black rights movements in the US and how are the HBCUs. So this was at one of the events I talked about it. And so I was developing the project for BBIP and Afro PWW. I was noticing I wanted to do something that wasn't just in English, but actually bilingual in English and Portuguese, because I noticed these students there too were also very interested in the work I was doing with these writers. So I was wanting to do something that was going to be more public facing, accessible, beyond just sometimes our closed academic circles. And so that kind of led to thinking about, what's the importance of this project? And just to provide you with some data, especially in the urban periphery where a lot of these youth are, where the school is located, you can see the homicide rates for male youth from ages 15 to 29 on the right. So Campo Limpo, that's the name of the neighborhood where the picture with the school kids that I was with. And then you can see on the right, Villa Mariana, that's a more upscale, upper class neighborhood, more in the center of the city. So you can kind of see there's a huge disparity in terms of access to issues to do with state violence, economic resources, et cetera. And also too, like I was saying here on the left, and more broadly in Brazil, 77% of young males killed in Brazil are Black. It's just like in the US, it's a huge disproportion. And this is something that I was looking at too with these artists and writers that I've been working with in Sao Paulo, is they're kind of doing stuff with their work to kind of look at how to use literature and art as a form of empowerment, but also kind of rethink, how is Black culture or identities to do with Black masculinity? Can that be redefined in ways, that go beyond, violence or kind of stereotypes to do with the larger popular culture? And so these are some of the things I was thinking about as working with these youth, working with these writers that were working with these youth as well too. So that kind of led me to the development of my current project. The current title is called Afro Artivismo, Redefining Black Masculinity in Sao Paulo. It's a scalar project I'm developing, like I said, with the Afro PWW. It'll be published through their University of Illinois Press. I'm very excited about this project. And this project actually will be kind of a parallel, kind of working in tandem. I'm currently doing a book project. I got an ACLS fellowship to write a book on, marginalized masculinities in Sao Paulo, looking at issues to do with race, identity, and space. So this digital project will kind of work kind of as a public humanities extension of that project, of that book project. So I really like how these will kind of work together. And with this project, this is something that's still in progress. You can see there's stuff, it's the formatting, I'm still working this out. And I wanted to do something that was more non-linear. So here, when you enter the project, you kind of see a map of Sao Paulo. And you can see there's different pins here. And these different pins kind of represent these different artists and writers that I've been working with. So you can see they're kind of spread out all over Sao Paulo. It's not just in one area. And so I want the user to kind of come in and then, they can kind of choose and pick, where do they want to focus on, what kind of route they want to take. And like I said before, the goal right here is to make it bilingual. You can see at the top, it has the two columns, English and Portuguese. Again, I'm still working on the formatting with, to make that look, more centered and et cetera. And you can see that one of the pins that's highlighted, it has the name of the artist, Clayton Catarina. So when you click on that, it'll take you to the next page. So this is an example of a page I'm working on. And again, it shows one of these artists, Clayton Catarina. And this is kind of, it'll be more developed later on with several pages. But this is just showing some of the work he's doing with youth there in the periphery, in the urban periphery of Sao Paulo. This is a project called Projeto Espectáculo, kind of like showcasing project. Espectáculo kind of means theater show, so kind of theater show project. So he's actually developing theater programs with these Black and brown youth that kind of evoke stuff to do with the orishas, kind of the Afro-Brazilian deities, kind of tied to Yoruba culture. So using those kind of mythologies to kind of help them explore issues to do with, their own, African ancestry. And so this is a really unique project to kind of showcase, how they're using their literature and art as, not just for, consumption, but also as a way of empowerment, especially for these kind of youth in these marginalized communities. And you'll see here it's bilingual, it's English and Portuguese. Again, I'm still working on how I'm going to want the bilingual aspect to be on the page, either as 2 columns or maybe a page you can kind of click back and forth. But the goal, like I said before, is to really make this accessible, for users not only in the US, but also in Brazil as well too. Again, this shows you some of the other pages as well too here. This is another artist. He's a visual artist, Ubade Gule. He's actually a multi-artist. He does work with, he's a published poet. He's an actor as well too, musician. But he tells me that his first main discipline is visual arts. And again, the first image is showing his work he does with like mask making with the youth, again, they're in the urban periphery. And at the bottom is some of his own paintings he's done that have to do with the legacy of slavery in Brazil. And on the image is showing Pau Brasil, that's Brazil wood in English. One of the other ones that has the gold coloring, it says ouro, that means gold, and then sugar, and then coffee, kind of showing the extractive industries in Brazil, and it's tied to Brazil and how that affects, issues to do with the legacy of slavery in Brazil. So all of these artists really kind of look at issues, to do with the African diaspora, but also ways of kind of bringing that art to their own communities as well too. And then one of the other artists I'm looking at, he calls himself an MC poet. So he's a rapper, but he actually has about 4 poetry books published as well too. So he kind of goes back and forth between rap and poetry and kind of raises those questions to do, is rap any different than poetry and vice versa? And so he also does a lot of community work with youth as well too. When I was there, I attended several workshops he did with youth of kind of showing how, rap can be used as a way to explore music and poetics, as a way to kind of develop your own voice. So again, these are just some of the issues I'm kind of looking at with these artists. And again, it's still in the early stages of kind of putting the site together. I have lots of content that'll still be added more and more, but I just wanted to share today, the basic structure of the site. And again, I'm very excited to see where this will go and to see that it'll be something that can be accessible, not just in the US, but also Brazil as well too, kind of thinking back to those students that I met in that school, and something that can be accessible to the public, beyond just, our academic circles. So thank you very much. And if you have any questions, because I think we still have about 5 minutes. So, if people have any questions or comments, I'm always open to hearing any questions or comments, because as I'm developing this project, that can also be very helpful to me as well too.
Yes, you do have time for questions, and thank you for that wonderful discussion of sound, visual, music, and word. That interconnection is just amazing. So please ask good questions to Eliseo. Does anybody want to offer a question?
I will, if that's okay.
Yeah.
I originally asked about the platform that you used, and Marilyn chimed in that you use Scalar. And I'm just wondering why you chose Scalar for this project.
I think I chose Scalar. One is because it was a platform I was already very familiar with. Last summer 2021, I took what's called a Scalar Summer Institute, hosted by USC. They're the team that actually developed the Scalar tool. So that was something it was like a week-long 30-hour kind of workshop. So that really helped me understand at a deep level Scalar. So I was very comfortable with it and using it. But I also feel Scalar is a really powerful tool, because in some ways it can function kind of like a traditional book, having something with chapters or a table of contents. But in other ways, it has a lot of flexibility in being something that's not always just so linear. It allows you to kind of explore the project in different routes or ways based on the user's kind of intellectual interests or needs, maybe to do with that topic. So like the example with the map. So I'm starting with that. So instead of just saying, oh, here's a table of content, you can go down linearly. Here it's saying something that's more kind of visually geographically oriented, and allows the user to kind of explore, whatever topics or figures that are of interest to them in that moment. So that's one of the reasons why I chose Scalar in that regards.
Mm-hmm.
Great, thank you.
Anybody else? I I just want to think about what this project reminds me of is returning to the notion of literary movements and periods. So
Yeah.
given us one, negrismo, negritude, we have talked about these things, but we haven't really actively employed them. And so this is a great way to expand that discussion. So thank you for one, giving us more language to work with. And the idea of this being bilingual is just fantastic. So thank you so much. We have a few minutes for yet another question. Anybody?
But actually, yeah, go Marina.
I have a question, and this is something that arose from the previous presentation as well, is the thinking about how time fits into the project. And I remember because we worked together on the initial project in the cohort 1, right? And we had tried to look at like time and space. And I guess I'm wondering, as I watch this presentation and think of the previous one, what ways might you incorporate the things that are time bound or thinking about time and history in relation to this project? And then I had put in the chat, thinking about issues of like masking, both like as a social practice, but also like the physical, because I noticed like with the second artist, he also, even though he's a visual artist, you were showing masks, right? So thinking about the notion of masking, and does that third artist have similar practices? Like how does the verbal and the visual play together? That's a lot of things I'm thinking about. And I'm also thinking, I know you, excuse me about my nails. I know that you have also audio and visuals as a part of it. So thinking about how those are going to work differently, not audio and visuals, audio and movies, right? How that works. Those are the things I'm thinking of.
Yeah, I think those are important. I think that idea of thinking about the time and space, I think are important things to think about in terms of, I think it also ties back to what Maryemma was saying about, how does it fit into these larger movements as well too. I think could be a good way in terms of the time aspect, because especially like these writers and artists, they're more recent, but they also had influences and came out of other previous traditions in Brazil as well too. And I think the spatial aspects too is also very important as well, because I think based on what part of the city they're in, some of these artists too are the children of migrants, or actually a migrant themselves to Sao Paulo, because there's that issue too of how does that play into it, of being from somewhere else and then coming into the city as well. There's some of the questions I'm thinking about to do with that as well too. But I think those are all important questions to kind of be thinking about with the development of the project.
Well, thank you, Eliseo. This is again a really exciting project. As I said, I was really excited to hear you take this movement into this newer period in terms of how it differs from or similar to, or it's built upon. So it's really important. Okay, Valerie, you want to take it away at this point? Thank you. And I'm going to go on mute for you to do that.
Thank you, Dr. Graham. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to begin by extending my gratitude to the Institute leaders and mentors and organizers for your continued support for all of us throughout this process. And I want to celebrate my fellow cohort. I'm in the current cohort of BPIP, and as well as the previous cohorts and our fellow presenters today. Thank you for sharing all of your important and meaningful scholarship, and I am truly inspired by everything everyone is working with. So today I would like to share my project that I'm working with in connection with Zora Neale Hurston and the town of Eatonville. So my presentation today is titled Walking All Together Like Harmony in a Song, a virtual celebration of the Eatonville community. So in chapter 1 of Hurston's autobiography, Dust Tracks on a Road, she writes of her birthplace, Eatonville, that Eatonville is what you might call hitting a straight lick with a crooked stick. It was not in the original part of the plan. It was a byproduct of something else. And so Hurston understood the importance of archiving what life was like in Eatonville. She carefully chronicled the charming details of the community. So today, Eatonville is an international historical cultural tourism destination. And in honor of preserving the Eatonville community and dedicated to Hurston and her work, I have created a story map to digitally enhance Eatonville's walking tour of Heritage Trail. Visitors on site and from our global community can take a stroll of the town's historic landmarks. My hope is to create a space in the virtual sphere where we can preserve Hurston's Eatonville and celebrate the Eatonville community of today. My hope is that this open educational resource will actually be utilized by the town of Eatonville and the Association to Preserve the Eatonville Community and the guests that are actually, doing the walking tour physically in the space, as well as by scholars, enthusiasts, and the general public. And so this is very much a work in progress, but I am happy to share what I have been working on and kind of detail where my project is heading. So a little bit of historical context about Eatonville for those of you who may be unfamiliar. Eatonville is one of the very first all-Black established, created, and governed municipalities in the United States of America. It was incorporated on August 15th of 1887, and it was designated and added to the Register of Historic Places on February 8th, 1998, and today still contains 48 standing historic structures. Unfortunately, however, due to the expansion of Orlando, right, the tourism mecca of the South, and the ever expansion of Interstate 4 to shave off a few minutes off of everybody's morning commutes, 100 acres of historic Eatonville has been demolished, and including really important spaces as like the original cemetery where all the original founders and the people who created the town and built the community were laid to rest. And unfortunately now a bougie middle-class neighborhood sits on top of these people's resting places, and it's just really sad. So I'm going to share screen here for a second. The walking app is made to be utilized digitally in hand with a handheld smart device while you're taking the tour. So it looks best to see it in this way. Let me go to share screen. Sorry, I'm a really bad computer. So if you happen to have your phone by you or anything, you can pull out your camera. Most new smartphones have the QR code reader built right into your camera lens. And so you should be able to scan this with your camera lens, and it will take you directly to the website for the walking app itself, which does look different based on if you're looking at it through a mobile app versus on like a desktop or laptop computer screen. So this will be able to give you a chance to kind of scroll around and play with the application so you can see what it would look like as if you were literally on the streets walking from historic location to historic location. And so this is a project that I have been working on for a while now, and inspired and supported through last summer's National Endowment for the Humanities, or Neil Hurston Institute. And so now my time here with BBIP, I'm creating a Omeka site to not only house this walking tour, but many other aspects of this project that I'm pulling together. So I'm going to kind of switch screens here. And so now with this Omeka site, I want to create a space where not only can I house the walking app, but also connections to the other Eatonville sites, such as the official Town of Eatonville website, the actual Association to Preserve the Eatonville Community website, as well as I think the Zora Neale Hurston Museum of Fine Arts, where a lot of the Zora Neale Hurston and Eatonville town kind of events are supported by the Museum of Fine Arts. So that kind of goes hands in hand. And then I also want to include a space where I have like biographies on people such as Zora Neale Hurston or Dr. N.Y. Nathiri, who is the director of the Association to Preserve Eatonville Community, so that people can have a little bit more background information on that. I also want to keep this create a space too for scholarly resources to be shared, such as, you know, anybody kind of working with Eatonville or Zora Neale Hurston, where we can have that free exchange, right, of information. And I also want to include an exhibit of multimedia or art kind of born out of people's experiences with Zora Neale Hurston or the Eatonville community. So I have been sending out letters to a lot of scholars or artists or people just engaged with what they're doing during the Zora festivals, during so that they can start sending me some multimedia and whatever it is that they're creating. I mean, I've been getting everything from like interviews, musics, pictures of quilting projects, pottery. I mean, the list just goes on and on. So I'm in the process now of receiving all of these wonderful artifacts. And so I'm going to eventually curate that into a digital gallery within this space. And of course, you know, have different discovery sets is what I'm calling it, kind of in my arrangement of how I'm going to house each of these different projects. So that's kind of the space I'm in now with this project. And I also want there to be a community engagement space where people who are just going to visit and doing the actual walking tour will have a space to share their experiences there, their pictures or videos. So that way that can be open for everybody to kind of access. And so, I apologize for that. So that's kind of where I'm at in this process, is kind of the curation aspect of it and how to formulate my digital exhibits based on all the different types of multimedia and artifacts and things that people are sending me. And so I'm kind of putting it out there that I'm happy to take any ideas or pro tips from people who have kind of worked on curating a larger digital exhibit like this that will have like such a vast array of multifaceted kind of projects and multimedia, because I want to be able to still structure it where there is a clear narrative that's kind of guiding not only the site, but the exhibits and the community engagement section as well. Hopefully that makes sense. It's a big bubble of wonderfulness right now, and I just am trying to find a way to present it in a way that not only researchers but the general public can access it in meaningful ways and still get the narrative that I'm trying to share outside of that. And I have a few minutes left, so I figured maybe just a quick tour of what I have been doing up until this point.
While she's doing that, I'll just remind everybody that this plugs right into the Preservation for the Eatonville Community, the PEC, which is incorporated and has been one of the models for how to bring these towns that had just disappeared or are being removed by extraction, how to really resituate them in a center space. And I think this project feeds right into that, because they get thousands of visitors, not just the festival, but thousands of visitors every year internationally. So it's an interesting way, again, not to just do a standalone project, but one that has an automatic audience already built in. But go ahead and share, Valerie.
Oh, thank you so much, Dr. Graham, and for saying all the important things I forgot to say in my nervousness. So this was the markup site. I wasn't really ready to share my Omeka yet. Perfectionist. And so this is one I created with the National Endowment for the Humanities Summer Institute. And basically, I just have a basic background information, the walking tour, links to the different Zora Neale Hurston and Eatonville community events and prospects, such as the Zora Festival that Dr. Graham just brought up, that does bring in thousands and thousands of people every year. And the beginnings of my community space, and this kind of goes back to our last presenter, I also am very much into the public art aspect of the Eatonville community. And so I also hope to have a separate exhibit within this where I kind of like work with the different public art that's happening that centers on Zora Neale Hurston and stuff. So I just thought that was really cool, Eliseo. And I just kind of have like my little first trip to Eatonville story up there, but I hope to see many more like this and to archive it. And I think the beauty of using Omeka for this project is the metadata and how then that can be easily used for not only like researchers, right, but for seeing. I'm interested to see the larger picture that can give us. Like, I'm thinking 5 years down the road with this project when it's filled with resources that everybody shared, right, and community stories that everybody shared. And I'm just excited to see what kind of data we can get from this in the future. And I think I'm almost at time, so.
Okay, thank you so much, Valerie. So hold your questions for the end, and we will go ahead to Kevin and before our break. So last presentation before the break this morning. Thanks, Valerie.
Good morning, everyone. It's really intimidating following all these great presentations, so many projects that are really developed, and unfortunately mine's not that developed yet. I'm in the first year of the introductory class, or introductory cohort. So what I'm doing right now is it's like a practice project at this point. I'm learning new skills and trying to play around with things. It's easier to have like read research and things like digital humanities research if I have like an end goal, and I can imagine if I have a project in mind. So this is kind of what I'm working towards. And it's also kind of a practice project because it's based on some activities that I do with students to help them try to start thinking like digital humanists, or getting them to try to think about what like human interpretation, machine interpretation, how they differ and how they're similar. So I'm going to start. My paper is called Trains in the HBW Corpus, Social Geography's Junction with the Social Imagination. So on both Google and Google Scholar, the most visible railway regarding Black culture is an invisible one. The Underground Railroad has achieved a position of ubiquity in public consciousness, becoming a central figure for understanding America's racial past and present. It undoubtedly has powerful aesthetic, political, and moral appeal. From the sometimes sparse facts have grown a rich and romantic legends suited to popular history and childhood education. It tells a story of cooperation and moral conviction for a nation that has too often lacked both. While the Underground Railroad is a special place in the American imagination, very real trains, whether they are long-distance commuter or subway, have been determining factors in America's social geography. Rail technologies have changed where Black people live, work, and travel on an enormous scale. Even the most generous numerical estimates about the Underground Railroad's impact are smaller than the railroad's industrialized influence on Black Americans. One might think of the proverbial other side of the tracks. Railroad lines brought Black citizens to new urban environments, but also continued the legal or de facto segregation of races. Posing questions about the amount of attention devoted to the Underground Railroad as opposed to other more representative elements of American life is not new. Recently, the long developing contributions of many scholars and artists finally broke into the mainstream. Surveying the history of Underground Railroad commemoration, a 2016 feature in The New Yorker brought critique to a larger public. The article's iconoclastic title and subhead, "The Parallel Slur of the Underground Railroad, Hardly Anyone Used It, but Provides Moral Comfort in White Heroes," captures the provocative argument. Other popular public-facing work, like the 1619 Project, takes a more measured approach, mentioning railroads and trains about 10 times, but not the Underground Railroad. A shift is currently taking place in how the past is remembered. Questioning national myths is important and healthy, but as certain narratives are decentered, it is equally important that the materials and data that can be used to create new stories are made available to scholars, students, and the public. And if figurative railroads become less central, it makes sense that real railroads, with their measurable material effects as well as their rich imaginative dimensions, assume greater importance. A great example of recent research that highlights trains and their material dimensions and everyday effects would be Maya Bay's 2021 Traveling Black, A Story of Race and Resistance. In one chapter, she explains America's history of travel segregation through the details of railway station architecture, rules, and mores. In literary studies, Michael Rushon Hall's recent works, such as The Prominence of the Railroad in the African-American Imagination, details how rail travel and employment were much more available to men from the end of the Civil War through World War II. This increased male mobility demanded domesticity from stationary women. And as railroad research progresses, our understanding of the past continues to develop in new ways. Miriam Thagard's 2022 American Women on the Writing Jane Crow, African-American Women on the American Railroad shows that Black women played a larger role in America's railroad industry than previously assumed, both as workers and as travelers. All of this is to say is that we no longer feel obligated to center white abolitionists on grounds of racial reconciliation or Black heroes for reasons of aspirational individualism. Literal railroads provide a way into understanding American history that is rich and open to continual reinterpretation. Scouring the internet, I noticed with excitement the reappraisal of railroads and their significance is well underway. Over the last decade in particular, various institutions have attempted to collect and make accessible lost histories about railroads in Black America. A great example is the B&O Railroad Museum's African-American Railroading Oral Archives. Other museums like the Southeastern Railroad Museum, the California Railroad Museum have put together similar online initiatives aiming to tell stories about the influence of trains on African-American lives. The Center for Railroad Photography and Art has developed a rich research guide. That was kind of originally my idea. I didn't realize someone had done it, serving as an online hub for a rising network of online resources. Universities also developed useful digital projects. An impressive example is the University of Nebraska at Lincoln's Railroads and the Making of Modern America project. Faculty and student researchers have assembled digital archives of documents about race in America's railroads, one about segregation, one about slavery, one about railroad employment after the Civil War. So I hope my dream digital project, something probably like a WordPress site with an index of railway texts and a selection of student classroom activities, could join these projects and link to them, contributing to a growing online ecosystem. While doing my preliminary research in the HBW corpus, I was struck by the sensitivity of America's Black literary output to both the practical and the symbolic importance of rail travel and employment. Making this trove of information more accessible is the goal of my project. Hopefully, hopefully researchers, the public, and students can all contribute to America's understanding of its history, and I think online resources are probably the best way to do so. So for the rest of my talk today, I'm going to kind of talk a bit more casually about some of the themes that have popped up. So the first is rail employment as a means for geographic and class mobility. I started with all sorts of search terms having to do with trains and kind of just using collocations. I tried to find other terms, so kind of rail employment like signalman and all these various jobs. The one that popped up that kind of like the biggest highlight for me was Pullman, which I knew of its significance, but I guess seeing how like rich the imaginative dimensions in literature is kind of interesting. So it appears in 122 texts, and most of those are hits. Some of them are like character names and things like that, but for the most part, it's related to Black employment Pullman Corporation. Mostly in context of either aspirational travel, like the desire to want to ride a Pullman train and then not be able to, or have to be resat in certain areas, or kind of the context of employment. So after the Civil War, George Pullman wanted to staff his sleeper cars, which was a brand new luxury with recently emancipated men, one to keep cross down and the other side to try to create the idea of it being like served sort of thing for passengers. So by the early 1900s, Pullman was the largest employer of African Americans in the country. It was a massive, massive factor in people moving to new locations, settling new towns, the creation of new neighborhoods, all sorts of things like that. In addition to these effects on the economic status and social geography of America, the HBW texts highlight how porters were responsible for the spread of news, trends, and particularly the Black press. Kind of the theme that emerges around the Pullman is words around like respectability, kind of that this was like a quiet, but something somehow like socially respected profession. So after decades of battling, the Pullman porters formed the first Black union with collective bargaining rights in 1937. This was like a multi-decade long struggle. So under the leadership of A. Philip Randolph, the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, as they were known, played a leading role in the social and civil rights activism. It was kind of an explicitly civil rights oriented union. And as Pullman sleepers became ubiquitous in all of America's passenger railways, Pullman porters both materially and symbolically transformed Black America, but it was transformation was a double-edged sword. So economic and geographic mobility became possible, as the texts all show, as literary texts, but it came at the cost of kind of these phrases around it. So 4,000 miles a month, that's how many miles a Pullman porter had to travel every month to be eligible for full pay and continued employment. So it's like a staggering amount. And then 1,000 men named George, that it was custom for white passengers to call every Pullman porter George. So it's kind of like massively dehumanizing, de-individualizing thing. So one thing that popped up when I started doing this activity with students, I oftentimes ask students, like, you know, name something that has to do with railroads and African-American history, and they all talk about the Underground Railroad, and then we say, like, okay, why are we thinking so much about this one thing and not all the other real kind of material history? So one thing that pops up is that whether or not respectable employment and travel emasculate, particularly regarding Black men who work for as Pullman porters. So I think it makes a good thing for college students. So I picked passages from William Denby's love story from 1978, using the worldliness and seductive potential of Pullman porters as a plot device. And this is contrast with Iceberg Slim's Pimp, the story of my life, which makes the porter a figure for anonymity, placidness, and servility, contrasting him to like the pimp's reputation, like a territory and some imagining of freedom. And we can do things like look at the words around it, see these different passages where Pullman porters across literature invoked maybe only for a paragraph, but it usually, you know, it seems to hit on questions of masculinity. The next theme I kind of hit upon was railroads as a figure for short-lived freedom and achievement. So the first I hit on was John Henry. So he appearing in 48 texts. It takes this double-edged nature of rail employment and abstracts it into myth and folk wisdom. And it seems like this myth is kind of based on Black industrial laborers proving their excellence, but these gains being short-lived, being threatened by profit-seeking behavior and the machine age. And it seems to be invoked as a lamentation about how railroads and manual work might leave Black workers broken and scattered in alien environments. So like the trains were a possibility of getting somewhere new, but there also is the possibility that it might, you know, leave you somewhere stranded and broken from a community. Another figure that pops up, kind of a folk here, is Railroad Bill, who's someone who worked for railroads and then started, like according to legend, although it probably was a real person too, it looks like, started breaking rules and then kind of traveling on the trains illegally and being kind of like a runaway convict sort of thing. So he's this bad man figure, appears in 5 texts, and he also shows how that there's like a short-lived but intensified freedom about leaving employment within the system and using the railroads, which is like this kind of disciplining thing, and using it, turning it on kind of on its head. This goes on with another theme that popped up, which was escaping the world of law, so hoboing and the idle. So hoboing, this culture of storytelling and ballad, represents an alternative life path across a lot of texts in the corpus. I was surprised, like 60 plus appearances, including in major authors like Ralph Ellison and Langston Hughes. Life on the rails in these texts appears to be liminal. There's more racial mixing, less hierarchy, more exposure to different cultures, but it's also kind of characterized by ephemerality and a sort of fantasy or insubstantiality. The major event that pops up a lot in the text that kind of interrupts this kind of hobo idol is the memory of the Scottsboro Boys, who appear in 25 of the texts, showing that the escape from discrimination in law into like the idol is like short-lived, and maybe the escape into fantasy or in literature could also be short-lived with the country as it is. So the last thing I want to work on is sentiment analysis, railroads and subways in the Black imaginary. So various scholars have shown how trains have been a figure of modernity, freedom, cosmopolitanism, and striking new territory in Black visual art, literature, and music. I listed all sorts of relevant scholarship if people want to take a look at it. So it seems like they're associated with travel, migration, and transformation, that they're positively valenced. This might be a defining tendency separating it from other lines in American literature. So we think about like Hawthorne and Melville and all these figures that Leo Marx talked about as being like the pastoral anti-train people in The Machine in the Garden, that famous book. And it seems like that could be something defining that African-American literature was wildly more optimistic about this, like this machine of futurity and migration and things like that. In contrast, if we were trying to think about other texts, that the subway seems to have less of an inspiration of hope and fantasy. If you think about texts like Amiri Baraka's Dutchman is kind of an extreme example. It seems like the idea that trains being stuck in one train track could be like tied down or stuck in the same tracks, that seems to have a more negative figure in literature. So my ultimate goal, once I learn some more skills, which I'm playing around with, but not learning as fast as I'd like, would be to use Sujet, a lexicon-based sentiment analysis package in R. And I'd like to eventually compare train text to subway texts, defining each through frequency analysis. My hypothesis would be the train texts have greater levels of optimism and positive emotions, maybe with a down sport at the end is like there is the ideal ends, where subway texts have lesser levels. It's something about urban environments were less inspiring of fantasy and hope. So the next thing I'll do is explain how I'm kind of taking some of this and start already trying to do it in the classroom. So my practice is like, this is like a demo, a practice I do about thinking like a digital humanist. So my hypothesis for this demo is using sentiment analysis of railroad and subway passages will confirm that railroads and distance travel are more positively valenced than references to subways and routine commuting. It's hard to pick passages because there's a ton that pop up for everything. It's like the problem is like picking ones that aren't stacking the deck, so you're getting the answer you want. The other problem is that there's not great software for or programs or packages for doing this for free without major tech skills. So I chose one that seems to be pretty effective, which is Text to Data's free demo, a machine learning commercial software. So the first passage I fed through it, picking 3 sentences with those reference to the subway in the middle, was from Robert A. Walter's The Moralist, a text I haven't read. So the rush of employees going home began in a moment. The men hurried by unseeing, their faces intent upon suburban time schedule, the subway, or the drink they expected at the next corner. The women were lighter-hearted, more effervescent. Their babbling talk did not prevent their eyes from roving in an eager search for the faces of friends, the novelties of passing scene. And the text to data demo did pretty well. Both my human interpretation and the machine interpretation were aligned. We both predicted, a little easier for me, that it was from a literary work. And they both kind of suggested that it was neutral tending negative. So the machine only recognized this first sentence as being, neutral positive. The rest it detected some irony in it and things, which I agreed with. But the next one I chose wasn't so successful and had more difficulties of deciding which text to put in. This is from Rudolph Fisher's Conjure Man Dies, A Mystery Tale, Dark Harlem. We have a passage that's pretty obviously negative to a human reader. So, well, there you are, still paranoia. But when it gets as bad as it is in Frimbo's case, they get dangerous, they get homicidal. Either first delusion moves them to eliminate their supposed persecutors, or the second generates such contempt for their fears, they'll remove them for any reason they choose. Gee, nice people ride in the subway with. Are you sure about this guy? Reasonably, I'm going back for more evidence today. So at first I just checked with the 3 sentences in the technical limited definition. So gee, nice people to ride a train with. Are you sure about this guy? And this rec didn't recognize the irony. At first it suggested wasn't from a literary text. It said it was neutral leaning positive, and it doesn't get the irony between these words. So next I interpreted 3 sentences in different ways. So not 3 sentences within a quote, but quotes only counting as 1 sentence. And this protocol did better. It rated it as a neutral passage, tending negative, which seemed to be kind of what the human interpreters would have chose. So it's kind of a way to get students thinking about and get myself thinking about, like if you're going to use sentiment analysis, do you count a quote as 1 sentence? Do you count it as multiple sentences? How do you decide what the unit of text you use to search with? Because you can do a whole text search, but for many cases, these references to subways and trains are only a minor part of a text. Some of them are central. So these are just ways that I'm getting started thinking about these questions, and I'll wrap it up right now. So thank you for your time, and I'm sorry my project's not more developed. I feel a little self-conscious about it.
Right on time, Kevin, and that sounds really exciting. I have to say, we're at time for our break, but I have to say that I am the child of a Pullman Porter uncle, and so I did do a lot of that train riding out of the train from Augusta, Georgia to New York, and for interesting reasons why I was sent north in the summer to get rid of my accent. That was one of the reasons that that are possible. But thank you so much. I am really interested in seeing how you've plunged into that project with students as well. We have a break coming up, and it's a 15-minute break, so we can do that now. We'll see everybody back at 10:40. And welcome to some of you who joined a little bit later. So I'm glad that we're filling out our spaces here well. So take a break, everybody. See you soon.
Maryemma,
Yeah.
I just want to make my apologies to the rest of the group that I will not be returning after the break.
Okay.
But I will watch the video to
That's
see
right.
the rest of these interesting projects.
Recording everything. Yes.
All right. And it's been a great conference.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Okay. See you in a minute, everybody. We are ready. I will ask Kymberly to start us off with her presentation.
Can everybody see this?
Yep.
Okay, so good morning. My name is Kymberly Keaton. I am a third-year PhD student at the University of North Texas. And I am an alumni of BPI. Very excited to be here with you this morning. So let's get started. The evolution of self-documentation in African-American community archives in Texas, a dissertation design in progress. So research agenda, dissertation research design, dissertation design brief, lit review, bibliography, and research survey, which is what I'm going to talk about with you today very quickly. And the quote for today in regards to my presentation, the past is always tense, the future perfect, the great Zadie Smith. Okay, so I'm going to let you read the screen and I'm going to come from a different perspective. I'm going to start out with my abstract. At the beginning of my professional career as a librarian, I noticed the lack of African-American community archives in Black libraries, museums, and institutions of higher learning in the Midwest and South of the United States. To better understand why this is happening, I decided to dedicate my doctoral research to learn more about individuals in Black communities, archiving their personal and communal history. My research is motivated by an interdisciplinary mixed methods approach using autoethnography, phenomenology, material probing, and creative research techniques. By extension, the methods are non-exhaustive to help examine and discover issues affecting African-American communities in Texas that prohibit its evolution, participation, and responsibility for self-documenting and collecting its local narratives for inclusion in Black spaces, Black galleries, libraries, archives, and museums, BGLAM. The results for the first stage of this research is basically showing that a need for a researcher to be involved as a participant in documentarian and community archival work in the African-American community. So what you see here is basically what I'm doing is just giving you a premise behind what community archives are about, which is it's a new research praxis, and then again, it isn't. And where I am coming from in regards to my research is looking at social issues affecting African-American communities from the past and present day in Texas. So the problem statement, what are the social issues affecting African-American communities that prohibits its evolution, participation, and responsibility for self-documenting and collecting their local endemic narratives for inclusion in Black spaces? The research framework, again, theoretically, it begins with autoethnography. Why autoethnography? I feel as though that as a researcher and doing the work that I do as an art librarian and archivist, I've seen that in the institutions that I've worked in, primarily African-American institutions, there seems to be a lack in community archives being personal histories, family histories, as well as that communal piece, showing that that you were here, you're a part of that community, you're a part of that society that existed. So the research methodology for this research design, it consists of using methodologies borrowing from information science, anthropology, ethnography, and the arts.
The data collection method includes quantitative and qualitative. I've collected a survey since 2020 when I started the program at UNT. Today, I have over 103 respondents for my survey. The data collection method is based on an UNT IRB approved user research survey. The data collection method is based on observation field notes that will require IRB approval, which it has. The data collection method is based on collecting digital interviews, oral histories, and community archives. I'm sorry, I have to move y'all the way. Data analysis is qualitative. And that's my research survey is still open, but it will be closing shortly. Here is a premise of my worldview of literature that I will be using for my lit review as well as the dissertation process. I'll just let you look at that. I know it's a lot of authors, but these are some great writers, scholars who have written about African-American community archives in particular. And that pretty much sums up my quick dissertation design in progress. And what I will say is that I will be honest, this was my first presentation that I gave in 2020. So you should know how far I am now in the process. I'm actually about to defend my juried first article being published by the University of Chicago next week at the Eliseo conference. By trade, I am an art librarian. I'm the founder of Art Library Deco. I do a lot in the great state of Texas. As far as Austin, Texas is concerned, I think the work that I'm working on, when I first came into Austin, I was named the African American Community Archivist and Librarian. So my work here in Austin, as well as in Missouri at Lincoln University, I worked in the arts and community archives. And from what I've seen in Black galleries, libraries, archives, and museums, we have a lot of work to do in regards to archiving communal history, as in you, all the individuals that I'm looking at. What does my research look like today? Again, my premise is autoethnography. I believe that the researcher needs to participate with that patron when you're asking questions. As far as the survey, as far as the oral histories, as well as just, impromptu conversations that I've had over the past 3 years. Right now, next semester will be my last semester of coursework, and then I will be heading to qualifying exams. I just also applied for the Fulbright to include a second portion. I just came back from Ghana, West Africa, real quick. I visited the Kumasi Library, which was the second library open in Ghana, West Africa, in 1952. And as I was walking around, I was just thinking about how do Ghanaians archive their communal history? And if we have the same issues, being that African American, which are two separate terms, okay? So in looking at that, I thought about when I came back, well, let's see if we can do a survey as well as create a repository for their public library system. So I applied for the Fulbright. We'll see what takes place. My goal is to include that portion of the research in the dissertation process and then do a comparison analysis of African-American community archives in Texas and in Kumasi in Ghana, West Africa. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Kymberly. This is exciting. I believe that library you're speaking of was one of the ones that Dorothy Porter Wesley influenced the development of. Yes, she was like the great roving librarian all over the world, the Black world, helping people to think about the value. The one thing I would ask, and since I know you have a minute or so, I just want to remind you the House Museums movement is really big right now. how do you think about house museums as one of those places where some of the archiving is being done, perhaps not in a professional manner, but it's still being done, it's still recording, it's collecting, and maybe that is an area to think about a positive direction in which we might encourage, but also perhaps help nurture. But that was just the piece that occurred to me, because that, I mean, I run into house museums now everywhere. They are not often documented in terms of, you know, there's not an index to them, which is a great thing to do. But anyway, a question for Kymberly. We have a couple of minutes here. Or you could.
I have a quick one.
Okay, Kevin.
So Kymberly, did you go to the Bomb Library at Legon? I'm a former Fulbrightist that had 10 great months in Ghana many years ago. It's a wonderful country. Did you go to the Bomb at all?
No, I did not.
Oh, wow.
But I will put that on my list. I will put that on my list.
So you must like this country.
Regardless if I get the Fulbright or not, I am returning and I am going to do the research. So, because I think it's an important component in regards to looking at both demographics, being that we are as one. So, which is something that I want to share in regards to from a historical premise. And Dr. Graham, in regards to what you stated, I will put this in the chat for everyone real quick. Art Library Deco is one of the reasons why I created, please check that out when you get a chance. Become a library subscriber or an art patron. It is my lifelong work in regards to creating an African-American library gallery virtually and physically in the future, which is a part of my dissertation as far as entrepreneurship and being that researcher as far as bringing the work to you and creating that space for you to be able to upload those works immediately in regards to art. So the art that you're looking at right now, if you just think about community archives and me being an art librarian, this is the work of Ramir Bearden, and look at all the individuals and look at all the history that you see. How many of those people were archived? And if they weren't, Ramir did it.
She's reminding us of something I was supposed to say anyway, so thank you for the prompt. Please do put in the chat any links that you have been sharing with us during the presentation, or those that you don't get a chance to talk about, so that we can have that recorded. And as I said, so just drop those things in the chat so that people can have access to them. Kymberly, this is exciting. Thank you so much. Did you tell us which cohort you were in?
I was in the first cohort.
First cohort, that's right. Okay. So, and it's good to see you make this progress toward the dissertation. So sounds like you've got a project that's going to take several cycles to complete, because you've got different worlds to have to encounter. So thank you so much. Let's now go to Marina. Take it away.
All right, so I'm so excited to be here. I can hardly wait to share my project with you. This project has been going on for a long time, actually. So I added a slide at the beginning. I was a part of BBIP Scholars 1 cohort, and I had the most beautiful experience. I was assigned, back then we were assigned to small groups or collaborative groups. We were the space and geography group, and I was so excited. With Taisha Thompson, those of you who attended the webinar this summer probably met her, or maybe you know her, and Sarah Meese as well. And then I was in that group, and as well Eliseo Jacob was in that group. So Sarah and Taisha did a project to do with Virginia vernacular language, and then we focused on something separate, but we all worked together to create our final project together. And now I'm in Digital Publishing Scholars 4. So I'm so excited and proud to be here, and I hope there'll be like a 5 and a 6 and a 10 and a 20. So that's who I am. I teach at Howard University. I've been at Howard University since 2017, and my title is Master Instructor. So it's like a permanent status lecture. So let me start with my presentation today. Hold on, because I set my timer. Oh yeah, that's good. Okay, so my project that I'm doing with digital publishing is called Writing with Hurston, and it's a scalar project focused on engaging HBU students with digital archives and cultural documentation. I teach in the writing program at Howard, but I'm trained as an anthropologist, as a cultural anthropologist, and so a lot of my interest always goes back to cultural documentation and language and identity and power and representation. This image you see here is an image of the Moreland Springer Research Center. It's in Founders Library. So it's a research unit at Howard University. And this is in Founders Library building, which is a historic building. Everywhere you walk, there's history there. So this is an image of that room. With my students, I really want to give them a sense of that we live in this online digital world, and there's so many amazing things we can do. There's so much access, just like today, we can be having a meeting together in a way that we wouldn't have done in the past, but there still exists the physical, there still exists the in-person. And so I try to help them see how artifacts are something that exists, or primary sources are something that exists beyond the digital realm. So this is Moreland Springer. My project, what I really actually want feedback, because I think of each time I present, I'm looking for feedback from the group about how I can continue to develop, to speak to my audience, but to develop a more nuanced project. And I really want in this project, it's really about looking at archives and looking at writing and representation, and it has an audience of students, but I really want to emphasize a theme throughout this project of visibility, invisibility, and hypervisibility in the archives, right? And this is something that's important. I met with my thought partner this week, Dr. Irma McLennan, and she gave me some excellent resources to think about this with. So here's on the left, you see Dr. Farmer. She just published, or she published in 2018, and it's been republished, Archiving While Black, and thinking about what that experience is like. And thinking about the social conditions in which archives exist or are created and accessed. I'm also very interested in bias in archives, and bias also within algorithms that search archives. And then the other project I was going to mention is the Cite Black Women project, which was developed by Kristen Smith in 2017. And that came out of anthropology as well. But thinking about how can we think about how Black women in particular exist in archives, or how, that's what those are the issues I'm thinking through, and I'm not currently happy with how my project's representing or incorporating those ideas. All right, so this is the actual project. This is the splash page, but it's just an image that I chose to work with. And what I envision is a scalar project where a student or a reader or viewer could enter in and kind of have a guided journey through primary sources and cultural documentation that kind of they feel relates to them and is a more personalized experience. So the reason I'm using scalar is it allows for that non-linear journey. It also will allow different viewers to take different journeys. And so what I imagine is the viewer would kind of select what field in the library. So this is kind of like the Library of Congress, numbering system. So I'm going to give you the example of a theater student might click on the PN and they might enter in Library of Congress through the idea of theater. Another student in nursing might enter through here, and it would take them to different curated sources that hopefully would pique their interest, right? So that's the splash page. So I'm going to take you on the guided journey for a student that's involved with the arts, theater arts, dance, and such. These primary sources would be examples. On the far left, it's an example of a newspaper clipping of one of Zora Neale Hurston's stagings or one of her musical performances. The middle image is an image of a set design, and on the far right is an image of a playbill. So these would be hopefully primary sources that could catch the interest of those students focused on those areas, and each student would be in each field of study or discipline would kind of be tracked to its own materials. That student would then go into a more general section, and all the students would then meet back up. So whether you're in theater arts or you're pre-med or you're in sociologist, whatever you are, you're an English major, you'll come back together as a group into the primary sources related to cultural documentation. And this, on the left, you see there's one that is her field notes in a turpentine camp. And on the right is an image of a letter that she wrote. And so this is a chance for people to kind of come back and see what are the overarching primary sources that many people could look at and find in common. And then students would be tracked back again into their sub-interest. This is an example of the practices of cultural documentation relating to theater arts. So thinking about photography and mapping space and place. There may be other fields, for example, sociology or anthropology would also go into this cultural documentation section with materials that are discipline specific. And then everyone would rejoin again to think about cultural representation and interpretation. This here is an example. This is a short excerpt from Mules and Men to kind of think about how Zora Neale Hurston has taken her different experiences and primary source collections and then created a narrative that is situated historically as well as spatially, right, and socially, in terms of this introduction she has, where she describes her entrance or her re-entrance to the Maitland Eatonville Township for her field work. Now, I also want to include in this a section that would be archival resources, where students who want to do future research or projects, or professors could call upon this archival resources to look further into the archive. So we have the Black Feminist Archive with Dr. McLaurin. There's also the Black Women Radicals has a series of archives that's developed by Dr. Jamie Smith, that has a series of archives that are particularly useful to students interested in this experience. So that's kind of that section. And then there would also be a section with examples of scholarship that could be kind of optional viewing. And so here would be an example on the left. You see some scholarship by Jacobs Huey, From the Kitchen to the Parlor, Language and Becoming an African-American Women's Hair Care. And it has a short little excerpt and some information about how someone could find out more about her. And on the right, you see Dr. Elizabeth Clark Lewis and her book that has to do with duty and fast living, The Diary of Mary Johnson Sproul, excuse me. And that is my presentation for today. Let's see. Oh, I have more. And so I'm interested in feedback.
Yes, you have good time for minutes. Come on. Questions to Marina, one of our veterans, BBIP veterans.
I guess I would say, can I pose my own questions?
Yes, please.
So some of my questions is I'm really interested. So I'm really interested in feedback about features that would make someone interested in recommending or using the site themselves. I envision the viewer of the site or the site user to be someone that, is either a younger person or someone who is like early on in their educational experience, maybe, at the general education level, college. But what would make you want to look more at it? What would make you consider assigning it or using it for a module, part of your course? I envision this as being something that could be an OER resource that could be paired with writing across the curriculum. Oh, I didn't introduce myself about that. I'm the new director of writing across the curriculum at Howard. And so something that could be paired with a writing across the curriculum course or a writing intensive course. There, I'll stop talking. What would make you want to use it?
So you might be thinking about a way for people to enter that is something, a device or an element of the site that would ask questions, and then people could then, query. And so we have some of that happening. We're working with computer science and engineering to kind of have that element of a website. So it's more machine driven, but the technology is not something that we know how to do. So we have to go to the engineering people to say, okay, we want this, can you fix it? So sometimes, you have to kind of go outside of the skill set that digital humanists might have, but the people who are more deeply embedded in creating the engineering or the front and the back end of the project. So I think you need some back end work that would do that a little bit more successfully than the front end, but that's just me. And I am certainly not an expert. Other questions come up?
That is an excellent comment, actually, too, to think about accessibility, because in mine, it's like, well, don't you want to just go to Library of Congress and click on your numbers and think, is that something people even know? That's very ignorant of me to be like, hey, I'll just jump into where your letters are. All right. I'm also interested very much in accessibility. So that's an excellent idea. What other thoughts do people have for me?
Yeah.
I do. One, I think, Marina, your project is so awesome and amazing. And the fact that you are really cultivating it for students and student interests and navigating the ways the students might interact with your site is exactly what I'm interested in doing. And so my project feels like it could really be valuable to look at your research more, because I really like how the potentiality of your site is that a student who would want to produce one of Hurston's plays could go in and actually be able to see archival research in this way of getting them to think about the ways that they process Hurston's text and her play text, and thinking visually about like, what does it mean to, think about the vernacular and visualize that on stage. And so definitely there's so many pathways the students and I don't know, just regular ordinary scholars like myself can be thinking about like ways to produce her work. And so it's really, really generative. Thank you so much for your scholarship.
Oh, and since you spoke, I would like to say too, because I'm doing a unit on Zora Neale Hurston in my class right now, and my students went in the archives and some of them found your work, your article that you published like 2021. And so they were selecting that for their projects. And I was so excited because I was like, well, I know her, she's my friend.
Yeah, I know people. You always say, I know people.
I know people. I'm so important. I felt so important, and they were very impressed that I knew you.
That's great. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you for those questions and responses. Any other comments, please put them, keep them in mind as we get closer to the end. And I'll now, Michelle, you can take it away because you're next.
Oh, great. Thank you so much. And thank you so much to all of your presentations. I've really enjoyed reading them or listening to them. And so thank you so much for that. I'll just go ahead and share my screen here. Like Marina, I'm really interested in how it is that we can continue to talk about Zora Neale Hurston's scholarship. I'm looking at it in the realm of theater and how we can continue to explore Hurston's theater from a very theatrical or thinking theatrically about her work and her. I mean, not many people know that she was a playwright and a filmmaker. A lot of people know about her anthropological work and her ethnographic work. But my project, my digital project is attempting to merge the two, where we're thinking about her ethnographic work. We're also thinking about ways to produce her work in the theater and really analyze text, her playwriting text, her style of playwriting. And then even digging deeper into the many layers of how anthropology and ethnography really fit into how it is that she was attempting to talk about Black women of the communities that she intersected with and that she worked with. So my project is in a lot of different places. I'm part of the current cohort of the BBIP, which I think is cohort 4. So my project is very early on, but I do have a sort of a demo site that I'm working with, and also some work that I'm doing with students as well. So the goals of my project are to build and encourage a more interactive engagement with Zora Neale Hurston and her theater. I'll also share this link in the chat as well. This is to this, and I love it that if you are, like, you have ideas that you could definitely put those and like maybe just tag it as a comment in this document. I would really, like Marina, I'd really love feedback and some ideas, continued ideas for how to continue to emerge this idea. But I'm building and encouraging more interactive engagement with Hurston and her life in theater. Providing accessible opportunities for theater audiences to gain more awareness and knowledge about her theater, and then to provide this in-depth exploration of her theater as an educational and a scholarly endeavor. I was also part of the National Endowment for the Humanities Summer Institute on Zora Neale Hurston, Zora Neale Hurston Summer Institute. And so this really, my ideas about this website really emerged from that think tank. And so I was really grateful to be a part of that, because I feel like this has taken me to the next level of the work, and I just continue to explore even more so. The kind of audiences that I'm interested in are theater audiences, particularly those who are of the community, of multiple communities who enjoy theater, scholars and practitioners as well. Theater studies, Hurston studies scholars. I think we can definitely say that there is a Hurston studies scholarship that's happening right now. So we can actually like term this as Hurston studies. And I'm like, Hurston theater studies, woohoo. And then also to like community members as well. So if you look at an overview of just my website in general, and I'll take us quickly to my website as well. I'm really thinking about the Hurston audiences as the nexus point for how we explore her theater. So thinking about context in terms of the historical and current ways of thinking about her work, and then how that affects theater audiences and how they begin to contextualize what this work is, how this work is meaningful and engaging. And then we think about performance. And so what are some of the examples of performance that have been done about her work? What are some ways that theater audiences can get a sense of who it is that she is by looking at her work? And then the other is this dramaturgical branch. And dramaturgy is an area of theater studies, that it's a very practice-oriented area of really providing audience context and productions, theatrical productions context for the work and the importance of the playwright's work. And so really just kind of find ways of disseminating that information to audiences is really, really important. And if anything, it's kind of the cornerstone of my project. Some of the highlights that I found is that dramaturgy is already a very established profession. It's established field of study. So I don't feel like I'm like reinventing the wheel to explore the dramaturgical aspects of Zora Neale Hurston's work, theater work. So that's a real highlight. And the other thing, which was completely, I won't say it was unexpected, but it was really, really awesome, was to discover that there's a pedagogical component to the work. And that in creating the website and working with student researchers and working this summer with a group of students on developing a project that a website that does look at Zora Neale Hurston's anthropological ethnographic work and marries that to play analysis was just really beneficial and really, really rewarding for us to work together on that. So pedagogically, I feel like it's just expanding my thinking about how I work with students and work with students in my research interest and really bring them along with me. And then we're working together as a community. Some of the concerns I have are like real life concerns about just the fact that I'm untenured. I am assistant professor. I'm also head of a BA program in theater arts here. And so bandwidth is always just a concern for me as I continue to look at this project and work on it. That's always a thing. Copyright is also something that's of concern to me in regards to how it is that I use or I can use Hurston's images on my site. I know licensing through Creative Commons is a very important element, but I would like to work with the Hurston Trust, of which I've been trying to contact them, y'all, for like 6 months, but we're still on the path. I'm gonna stick with it. Of getting them on board, but it takes some time just to even get an audience with them. And funding, because this is not time, it's time consuming, it's lovely time consuming that I absolutely enjoy, but I do think that some of the next steps is funding for it. I do get a lot of institutional support here in my institution, and so that's really important and valuable. I actually have a junior leave coming up in the spring where I could spend a lot more time devoted to this when I'm not teaching. So I do have some institutional support, but I think in future, certainly more funding is going to be needed. Right now, we're building content. I'm building so much content right now. I have student research assistants who are building synopsises of the plays, who are building potential lesson plans, who are just building a lot of work. And I myself am also building content in 2 articles that I'm writing right now for an upcoming book. So I'm also working on that content, building content right now in the fall. My next steps are in the spring is to continue to do more data gathering. And that's looking at the intersections of Hurston's work, theater work with her other contemporaries. We have a lot of information out there right now about her work with Langston Hughes and a lot of other contemporaries that she worked with. And so I'm continuing to just for myself build that understanding for myself, thinking about her work and how it is that I have a public archive of her work in that sector, in that area. And then again, looking at my interest in anthropology and ethnography and connecting that to theater, exploring Voyant tools to analyze her play text and her writings, to then look for how I'm interested in Black women connections among Black women of the early 20th century. I think that the ways that she talked about in her plays about the presence of Black women is really intriguing to me. And so I'm looking to build a digital database that's going to link her playwriting to her anthropological work, her ethnographic research, and then also be able to see as a through line the ways that Black women emerge in her plays and fight marginalization in her plays, and how that's reflective or attempting to reflect a way that she saw Black women in everyday life. In the summer, I'm really hoping to work with students to co-author a paper on Hurston's work using digital tools, using our websites, because they also have a website as well. So using our two websites and thinking pedagogically about the process of them creating their site and me creating my site and our work together as a community. My long-term goals are building a public Zotero bibliography of scholarship resources that are connected to her theater. So I'm hoping that as I continue to research, I'm just adding to that bibliography. Looking at copyright, and then trying to create some like Hurston original website art that I think would be really cool to go on the site. And then again, having this this fully functional public website that I'll show you here. So this is just a template right now. It's just a kind of a, it's not public. It's just kind of my dreams, musings on it of what it is that I want to include. So you can see here where I have it divided into a few sections, definitely performance and plays, and dramaturgy is probably the one that I've been working on the most part of developing content for. I do have, it didn't come up here, but yeah, there it is. One of my research assistants wrote I have them all writing synopses for the plays. And so this is one synopsis that's been created by my research assistant, Evelyn Zhang. And then I have that. And then here's the website that my students worked on over the summer and it's probably not going to come up there, but I'll show it here. This is a site that they created over the summer that I helped mentor as part of a fellowship that 4 students did over the summer. And they're looking at just really cool. I'll also share this in the chat as well. This is a public site that they created that again links Hurston's anthropological work to her ethnographic work. And they include all the plays on here. And then they include this really great timeline that includes a timeline of Zora's travels on here. That's just really, really neat of it. Where she was born, some public information, just in case the theater audiences didn't know about Hurston's sort of life in that way. And so they include this information in here. And then they also include down here some of her travels, and they connect her travels specifically to her theater, which is just really cool. So looking at Lawing Jawing which is a play, and connecting that to Georgia, the area of Georgia, where she is talking about, where she's setting the play in there. And then they're also looking at other places here, and you just like can really coolly click on the map. There's Eatonville here. And then they're also looking at it in terms of the demographics of the area, and just to give theater audiences a sense of where it is that Hurston wrote the plays, what she was thinking about in terms of space, giving us some context about where it is that she's from, how it is that space is important to that, place is important to that, and some other really cool things here. So it just begins to do that work of what I like the full website to do. And eventually I want to include character maps, infographics, a set of context here, and then there's emerging Hurston theater studies where people can submit citations. And we have this public Zotero bibliography. If y'all don't know about Zotero, you got to know about Zotero. It's unbelievable resource. And then just some other archives that I'd like to include. So that's just the site there. Yeah, so yay. I don't know if I ran out of time or not, but that's what I'm thinking right now.
I was talking, but with my mute still on. But yeah, you're in good time. Just a couple of minutes left, but intriguing. I'm thinking now, though, with many projects focused on Hurston, it feels like we need to have a catalog of those various projects so that people will know where to go. And one, you can become a community working together. Or, you know, Marina referenced the approach we used in the first cohort was putting people together in teams. This might be a team so that this information can be compiled, at least as a catalog or an index, so that people will have all of them together, because there's a lot more stuff going on, as we know. Hurston is in right now. She's the in person right now. And so just making sure that information is compiled and accessible so that people know so much work and can contribute to it. So you might have a contribute space for each of you. Maybe that can be a collective button where anybody can invite and share and upload some information that gets distributed to all of you, depending on what it brings to the project as a whole. So anyway, okay, well, Kevin, we have one final presentation before we get the Q&A, and so I'll turn it over to you.
Okay. Now, I haven't heard anybody say this, but I came in with one idea for my project, and I'm sort of at a phase now where I'm doing something very different than I initially had supposed I was going to do, just like listening to other projects and all of the great information we've been able to be exposed to the last few months. So now I think the direction I'm going in is I want to look at some of the literary pieces by Black writers of the 19th and 20th century that describe Black folks who wrote about rural Black life and culture, especially in the Low Country South. And by Low Country South, I mean the very bottom of North Carolina, where Michael Jordan's from, Jacksonville, North Carolina, through South Carolina, coastal South Carolina, and then coastal Georgia, and then the very top of Florida, Jacksonville, Florida. So you got one Jacksonville in North Carolina to another Jacksonville, Florida. So the so-called Low Country South. I'll get to why in a minute, but that's basically, I'm looking for pieces that Black folks have written that discuss Black life and culture in that particular part of the American Southeast, right, the Low Country South. So I have a couple of goals in mind, why that particular space and place, and why the 19th and 20th century, right, when not the 21st century. I'm trying to use Africology, what you would call Black studies, Africana studies, whatever nomenclature you want to use, to examine and re-examine aspects of Black rural life, Black folks who find themselves living in the rural Southeast, Low Country Southeast. Because as a young person in New York City, like so many kids in the 1980s and 1990s, we spent summers in the South, right? We had cousins who were in the South who would, come north for a few weeks, but most kids up north, New York, New Jersey, in the Philly, Baltimore area, we went south, down into Georgia, North and South Carolina, Virginia, if you had folks there. So I've always been intrigued by Black life in the South. More importantly for me, Black life in rural spaces in particular. And I do believe that Black people living in rural Southern spaces, the Low Country and beyond, have a particular way, a unique way of sharing Africanity, their Blackness, expressing what it means to be Black in rural spaces. So now that I'm connected with BBIP, and there's a seemingly endless amount of digital archives, I want to begin to dig through and look at some of those descriptions of Black life and culture by Black writers. So like I told y'all earlier, I'm a New York City boy from humble beginnings in the South Bronx. And my dad's people then and now live in Georgetown County, South Carolina. And for the most part, Georgetown is still rural. It was really rural then, it's still fairly rural now. The development is south in Charleston and north up in Horry County, which I would call Myrtle Beach. I remember where there was only one Myrtle Beach, Dr. Graham. There was Myrtle Beach, not North Myrtle Beach, South Myrtle Beach. It was just Myrtle Beach back in 88, 89, these things. Georgetown is a mostly Black rural space. You have North and South Santee, which are overwhelmingly mostly Black and working class people, farmers, rural Black folks living everyday lives, right? Living everyday lives. My mom's people are from Remini, which is a bit inland, but also they farmed, and it's another very, Black rural space. So I've been intrigued by this for a very, very long time, and making connections between what it means to be Black, what I would call Africanity. We use that term in Black studies, and rurality, ruralness, making some new connections between the two. This is for me, I'm so happy to be here with all of you, because it's the tip of the iceberg to something much larger and broader that I'd hoped to do about a year or so ago, when it comes to how Black folks in rural spaces communicate identity, how we communicate identity in rural spaces. So I want to investigate and document these connections between Africanity, so-called Blackness, and rurality. And I'm a communication scholar and an Africologist. So these things, I think, have a lot of potential in them. Now, you can't, I tell my students this all the time at Mizzou. Now, you can't describe anything without defining it first, right? So, there's some quick definitions of Africanity. And I think, I'm a big fan of Lorenzo Down Turner. Speaking of, the Low Country and Gullah Geechee people, Dr. Turner began writing in the 1930s, and what he wrote then is, I think, even truer today. Most of us walk around, so-called Black people, in a day-to-day sense. So we have no idea how much Africanness is still in us. It's still in our everyday lives. You can't whip or beat or terrorize the culture in its entirety out of any people. Something's going to remain, but Dr. Turner called those African retentions, right? And I think there's so much in us that we really have no idea. We know why we do certain things, but it's African, right? It's part of our Africanity, direct connection to the African continent. So there's a couple of quick definitions, and of course, the more difficult definition is rurality. What does it mean to be rural? What is ruralness? In communication studies, there really is no agreed upon definition. There are several in competition. This journal, this In Context journal at Indiana, I thought had a fairly good read on it. It is a vague concept for folks who study business and folks who study communication. It's a vague concept. What does it mean to be rural? What is a rural space? So me and two other communication scholars, we're hoping to really give the field, give our discipline at least a more agreed upon definition of what it means to be rural, what is ruralness, what is rurality, right? So we're working on that. The USDA has the definition that I've been using of late. I think it's close as one can get for now. Me and two friends may get closer, but this is not a bad one for now. People who live in a non-urban, right, or a country area. Now, what is a country area? Okay, so we can do this all day long, go in circles. But I think it's a fairly good starting point, at least for me. And then examining rurality in general for everybody. Then we can get to people of African descent living in rural spaces, and my notion of Afro-rurality, the possible unique ways in which people of African descent may express, demonstrate, and share their culture in spaces, places defined as rural. Such expressions, demonstrations, and sharing can include notions of rurality, ruralness, family, friendships, and freedom. Now, I'm just thrashing this out now. It's really relatively new. I've had a lot of ideas, in my head for many, many years, and now putting them on paper and really adding meat to bone is, this next stage where I'm at now. And of course, right, in America, that'd be the same thing in Europe, very different concept in Africa. In America and in Europe, when you even say the word rural, it's almost like a reflex to think about whiteness, right? Rurality as a white space. It isn't often that we really imagine Black people in rural spaces in America or Europe and Africa, yes. And I thought back to my youth, as a young person watching syndicated TV back in the day. And you'd be hard pressed to find any American television show before 1995 where the setting was a rural space and there were people of color in that space, and certainly not, Black people in that space. So, I had to make a little hit list of some of these TV shows, the Beverly Hillbillies, the Waltons, Andy Griffin, maybe RFD, all of these shows, And it really is true. When a Black face did pop up every now and again on any of these shows, it was sort of shocking. It was sort of surprising. And you couldn't help but notice it because they were depicted as such white spaces that when a non-white face showed up, when a Black face certainly showed up, right, it was like, wow, there's a Black person, right? On my screen. I'm not sure if there were ever any Black folks on the Beverly Hillbillies. Andy Griffith every now and again, yes. So I see Michelle shaking her head. Michelle, I'm not sure if anybody Black ever showed up on the Beverly Hillbillies. Okay, I've not found any evidence of that yet. It's a very white rural space where they were at in West Virginia. And then they end up, of course, in Beverly Hills. But remember, every season they went back to West Virginia. So they had a connection to that rural space in West Virginia. I don't think anybody Black ever showed up. Little House on the Prairie, there was one Black family that popped up on occasion. And again, it was shocking to see. And Laura Ingalls had the little Black girl was Laura Ingalls' friend, and she'd pop up here and there. The Andy Griffin Show, once again, you had that one Black family that lived somewhere in Mayberry, who knows where, I don't know, Mayberry had a hood, I don't know, South Mayberry or North Mayberry. But also it was an overwhelmingly, white space, right? How many Asian people showed up on the Andy Griffin Show in Mayberry, right? How many dark-skinned Hispanics, right? And again, that one Black family that would pop up on occasion, once or twice a season. And then of course, this is the great spinoff, right? Mayberry RFD, some of the characters that left the Andy Griffith Show had their own spinoff, late 1960s, early 1970s. And of course, again, we're into the 70s now, and it's still a very, very white space, this Mayberry. And I found it interesting. I hadn't thought about it until I began to do research a few weeks ago. The Mayberry RFD title, that RFD stands for Rural Free Delivery, right? You had these spaces that were so removed, from, dare I say, civilization. They were so rural that they had the post office had to have a special service, right, to bring these folks their mail. So studying, Black life and culture in rural spaces is something I'm passionate about. And as I explore, the unique ways in which we as Black people, African people, express that culture in rural spaces, I'll begin to flesh out a clearer, more definitive definition of Afro-rurality. So that's my project. So I want to begin reading, looking through some of these literary works that I know have been digitized by Dr. Graham and others, and just see if I can find Black folks writing about Black life and culture in the rural sense, in some of these archives, some of the digitized books. That's my goal. So, thank you, folks. I don't want to keep you too long.
Thank you, Kevin. I mentioned earlier that there's new work emerging from that Gullah corridor because they have funding to do that. They are part of a project that the Mellon Foundation funded that is based in Morehouse. And so do be in touch with them because they are starting these different research units that are trying to try to counter the tourism aspect of it and shore up the research aspect of it. So, but it's the Gullah Geechee Corridor, I think is the official name of it. And they have an organization, they have a director, a CEO, and all this kind of stuff. So you want to make sure and I can send you that information. I'll be happy to do that. We are just about at the point where we should be doing our quick Q&A. So we can start, of course, in reverse if you want to, in asking Kevin, who was the last presenter, some questions, but we have some time now to put more questions on the table. So Kevin, you can stop sharing and we can go back to our screen, our wonderful, there you go. Okay, so if you have questions, I see hands going up, so let's go ahead and start that. I definitely see a lot of what I call cross-fertilization in these presentations, but I'm gonna curb my appetite for talking about that. And Seth, you have a hand up, and then Kymberly has her hand up, so I'll give those two people, get us started with questions.
Great.
So question.
Yep, thanks. Kevin, so I have a question. So, somebody who thinks a lot about spatial definitions and so forth. So I really like your concept of Afro-rurality. I think my question is, how you called it the Low Country, and Dr. Graham called it the Gula corridor. So, Afro-rurality would extend beyond just the Low Country, right? So how, or what sort of, not justification, but what sort of thought process went behind the idea of this particular aspect of Afro-rurality as opposed to lots of other aspects of it? Or, what are you hoping to gain by limiting it to that area, and what might you lose? I'm just kind of wondering about the thought process behind that particular space.
Seth, that's a great question. That's a great question. So the Gullah Geechee corridor is in the Low Country, right? So, synonyms. I've had a lot of contact over the years with Dr. Graham, with the folks who run the Corridor Commission, Jamal Taray, Pat and Jim Bacode, of course, Queen Quet the Great, right? So I know all these folks, just great people. Now Jim Bacode passed on about 2 years ago. I actually helped him build some of the structures at Geechee Kunda Museum, literally with my blood, sweat, and tears. But Pat is still there. The museum is not open right now. It's been closed for the last year and a half. But Pat Bacode is still at Geechee Kunda, actually. But it's hard to run it, without Jim, because she's wheelchair bound. So now, Seth, there were two things sort of working in tandem. Why isolate the Gullah Geechee corridor, the Low Country, and not, let's say, New Orleans or wherever, right? Alabama, wherever. Because I think Dr. Lorenzo Dal Turner then and now is right, that you're going to find the highest number of African retentions in the Gullah Geechee, in that corridor. I think it was true in 1938 and it's true now, because those people are living in a space where they are aware of their connection to West Africa, and they're proud of it, and they're trying to keep those retentions alive, right? Those things that were passed on over the generations. I'm not sure if that's as true in other places where you find, Black folks, where people are actively trying to keep their Africanity in place, dear brother Seth. So I respect them for that. And of course, now, let's be honest, Seth, my dad in People, Georgetown, one of the oldest Gullah Geechee enclaves, what I mean? So I got to show them love, show respect. I got folks in Charleston, it's sort of that in a personal and professional sense. I think it's the most, it may be the most, it's the ideal space to study remaining aspects of African culture, because those people are literally trying to ensure that they keep those aspects alive in a day-to-day sense. So it's still there. If there's going to be any Afro-rurality in anybody, I think it's in them, in Gullah Geechee folks. And the great people.
Yeah, I was just going to add Serena's comment about geography and remoteness. That's a fundamental point you want to add to that conversation, Seth.
Because they were so isolated for so long, especially the islands, right? Sapelo, St. James, St. John's, where many people of European descent didn't want to live until really the 1960s, 1970s, to be honest with you. So you have these isolated pockets of Black people, right? And that also helps to keep the culture alive in some version of an original form. So the baskets that they carry on their heads, the women, they still sew the baskets like straight from what you'd find in Congo or Senegal. It's an amazing culture, Gullah Geechee culture, it really is.
So Kim is going to add to that conversation. David, I see your hand as well.
So my question is for Dr. Graham and Dr. Hills, and this has to do with that African component. Going to Ghana, Dr. Hills and Dr. Graham, this is my second time going, and the first time I got to go, I basically was in Accra, like the central parts of Ghana. This time I had the opportunity to go to the northern parts, which I would say is the rural aspects of the country. And then just listening to what Dr. Hills was talking about in his presentation, I guess my question is it our duty, which I believe it is our duty, to connect those dots, though we're still in these United States? Is it our duty to connect those dots in our body of work as scholars, as Black scholars, as it pertains to whatever we're doing, always bringing that component of the continent in our body of work. I think it's important, but I just wanted to ask that question. Do you think it's important to do? Case in point was Zora Neale Hurston. You know, folk tales, songs, just all the work she did, that didn't derive in the United States. That started in the continent with us as a people. So I'm not saying you haven't did that, Dr. Gibbs, in regards to connecting those dots, but isn't it important for us to connect those dots, especially being where we are right now, K through 12 in Texas? You may get some African-American history. You may not get any history at all. So that's my question. Hopefully it's a question.
I'm
So
gonna put it out there now, Dr. Keaton. I'm gonna call you Dr. Keaton now in advance. The main project of Africology, Africana Studies, Black Studies, is what you just articulated. That's what it is. And at my core, I'm an Africologist. And then surrounding that is communication studies. So I would absolutely say yes, Malifa Sante, Dr. John Henry Clark, right? If you're not making those connections, I don't know what you're doing. That's just me. Okay, I don't know what you're doing as an African person, so-called Black person. It should be central and fundamental to our work and to our souls, our very spirits as African people. Now, I've been to the motherland 10 times, and I tell my students, Dr. Keaton, I've done everything legal you can do in Africa. Taught, been a student, Fulbright, NEH. If you can do it legally as an American citizen, I've done it in Africa. Seen 28 countries. It's been a great blessing. Spend that much time on the continent, almost a year as a Fulbrighter, 9 months with the State Department, Bureau of African Affairs. So yes, Africa is my life, right? Africa is my life. So I couldn't imagine it not being central to my work and to my very existence. The love, respect, and study of Africa and African people and cultures.
Okay, David, you had something to add to that conversation or another question?
Yeah, I have another question for Michelle in particular. But first, I just want to thank everybody for all of this amazing work that you've been presenting. I've really enjoyed all of these presentations you've had. But yeah, for Michelle, so I'm coming to this more from the computational side, right, for building out methods for text analysis. And I really think that there's a sense in which the study of drama is really underrepresented in the digital humanities more generally. Right? I think partly because we just don't have a lot of great tools out there for working with the unique structure of plays. Right? Plays are just very different from novels. Right? They have dialogue, there's dramaturgy, there's this aspect of being on the physical stage that you just don't get in novels. So I would love just to hear from you about, given the fact that you have this part of play analysis as in this area of research that you're carrying out, what kind of methods are you using for getting at play analysis? What kind of stuff would you want to learn from the study of the text itself of plays? And what do you want to do that doesn't quite exist yet in terms of tools?
That's a really great question. I am really interested in specifically looking at how Black women are represented in her plays. And I really want to, because so much of her work is connected to a representation of trying to get some kind of authenticity of Black life. And so I believe that that also exists in her play work as well. And so I'm really interested in discovering how it is that she will take, in her plays, there are often games, children's games. There are often euphemisms that are used that we'll see even from Mules and Men to her plays, where she's kind of like sort of copying and pasting what it is that she gathered in the field to her plays. And so I'm really interested in how that's utilized in the plays and how they kind of move the conflict, move the action in the story forward. I think that there just isn't, I agree with you. You're right, there is a sense of really, I think what we see in terms of theater and the digital humanities is either this sort of performative aspect of it, where we, see like videos of plays being performed, or we see like just copies of plays being digitized and placed up. But I agree that there's not really a lot of tools that will get at this deep analysis work of how many times a particular character is is highlighted or is seen in the play? How many times does particular phrases appear and appear again? And what is that deeply saying about the people themselves? So Voyant is probably the closest I found, and it is a lot of work to actually like digitize. I took a play, I digitized it into Voyant, and it took me, oh my gosh, like hours to just kind of like pick and piece from there what I was looking at. So I do think that if there is some tool out there that exists, there's more, but something that thinks about formatting and how plays are formatted and can kind of glean through formatting in that way, as opposed to like me going through and like creating an Excel sheet with like dialogue on one side and like who's speaking on the other, that if that tool exists, it would really help. So yeah, so that's what I'm interested in.
So I would have to say, David, I'm going to absolutely ask if we can exploit you at this moment, because your work in computational stylistics and linguistics is really important. And some people have been reaching out to you, others have not. So we could benefit from sharing some of this as you've been listening to the presentations today. If you have some ideas and some platforms and software that we are not aware of, please share it, because I think everybody would benefit.
Yeah, so I see Mbali's hands up. If you want to go first, well, let me put some links in the chat and I can come back and talk to you afterwards.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't realize your hand was still up, David. I was just going to say, within the field of stylistics, there's a theory called textual theory, and people have started using software to kind of structure, what plays look like. So stylisticians have spent a lot of time looking at drama and at performances and how you can actually talk about the different levels of narrative that are occurring within that space. So I would say textual theory is one way to think about how you can, what you can talk about in terms of plays and kind of structure that in terms of how people understand aspects of plays, the themes, the actors, the characters, et cetera. So that's what I was going to add. Stylisticians have done a lot of work in that area. And if you want to reach out to me, I can share with you some resources that David might know, actual computational items that you can use to help you do that work.
I'm definitely going to be doing some cross-fertilization among you folks. So, okay, thank you so much for that. And please, would you put a link in the chat so we can have it? So, okay, David, you want to follow up on that?
Yeah. So I was going to say that one of the students who I'm working with right now at Berkeley is developing essentially a pipeline for working with dramatic text, right? He's focusing a lot on queer drama in particular, but it's also the kind of problems that you're talking about, Michelle, about this differentiating between the dialogue as it shows up in a play from the stage directions, right? That's not an easy problem. That would take a lot of work just to go and copy and paste by hand. He's focusing a lot on trying to figure out, in the context of a play, can you figure out who is talking to whom and when you see a floor change happening, right? It's like really interesting connections about how power is being represented as the people who are able to actually make those floor changes and not respond to somebody else. But yeah, I think I don't know of tools out there that can do this automatically yet, but I hope that his work is going to result in something soon in the next year or so. For everybody else who's not working with dramatic text, I have software that I have used for a lot of different projects that are essentially performing a kind of character analysis for literary text. So I put the link to that in the chat right now. It's called Book NLP. And Kevin, I was even thinking about this from the perspective of the trains from your presentation earlier. Right, there's a sense when you're using sentiment analysis, right, to get a measure of how people are thinking about trains, right? Trains versus subways. And sentiment analysis, is a really complicated and slippery thing because people often use it to refer to very different kinds of things, right? The Sujet's Jockers sense of it that you're referring to is more a sense of sentiment as tone, right? Of whether or not the vibe of a passage is happy or sad. That's different a little bit from how sentiment analysis was originally conceptualized as being the attitude that a writer has with respect to some particular thing. Like if you're leaving a review for a movie, did the person like that movie or dislike that movie, right? There's a very specific sentiment object that you're expressing this relation toward. And I wondered in this context here, if you can think about a train or a subway as being a kind of a character that exists in a book, where what you're trying to figure out is not just whether or not people associate happy or sad vibes with a train or a subway, but rather to figure out what trains are doing and having done to them, the kind of characteristics that people associate with those objects that are not fundamentally different from the kinds of things that characters do and have done to them in these stories as well. And so book NLP might be another avenue for exploring this kind of question when we treat trains as being people in that sense.
Okay, so
That's incredibly helpful. It never occurred to me to think about it that way, but yeah, I mean, in a literary text, there really is no reason not to treat things that are non-human as not having like character, device, sort of roles. That's really helpful, and obviously helping me think about, because I'm like a complete novice at this, of thinking about which tool to use and which approach to take, because I'm still just trying to read through research and try to figure out now, but that's really helpful. Thank you.
Yeah. Let me also add, sorry, let me also just add, add one thing to carry on Maryemma's comment earlier. So I'm afraid I can't make the group sessions later because I have to bring my son to a soccer game. But if anybody here wants to chat about computational things, please send me an email. I'm happy just to get on a Zoom call with you. Let me drop my email into the chat right here too.
Okay, thank you for doing that. And there is a question about Marina, if you're talking about spoken pieces, that means sound pieces, sound documents, I would imagine. So a question about what is out there that allows you to do what we need to do with sound, you know? So there are lots of ways in which documents are not always written, which we digitize, but what about the sound pieces? So if anybody has, or you, David, anybody else has thoughts about that. If you're talking about language and linguistics, obviously you're talking about sound. So I'm wondering how, and this is definitely not an area that I have much knowledge of. So, Mbalia, you might have some sense of that as well, because you work with language, I know clearly. But the spoken word, and I know Marina and Eliseo, who were dealing with a lot of that this summer, which was a spoken language. It was, rap, it was sound. So yes, how do we do with that? Where can we get more information about that?
So I can say, so Mara MacArthur is somebody who does a lot of work on sound and voice in the context of the digital humanities. She has a lot of great work on looking at poet voice in particular, right? So the kind of tenor that you have when you're delivering a poem in a spoken setting. So I'll put some links into some of the software that her group has developed for analyzing prosodic features of text, of audio, that might be useful for that.
I was looking in the chat for more questions, but also please flip your hand if you have some, so we can, we have a few minutes before lunch, and I know everybody might be at that moment physically to needing a longer break than the few minutes we had earlier. Are there other questions? Did I scroll down enough to see? I was trying to make sure that we caught them all. So we need a break. We're going to be coming back after lunch. And you have about 45 minutes for lunch. So please, again, stay hydrated. We're talking a lot, listening a lot, sitting a lot. So, and we'll see everybody back at 12:45. And thank you again for a wonderful morning session. And David, thank you, and appreciate your spending time with us today and getting us all those links.